Live from New York City, you are listening to Paranormal Now.
Welcome to Paranormal Now. It's Alan B. Smith, your host, and I invite you to join us as we traverse the cosmic highway of paranormal portals and tantalizing turnoffs. Tonight, joining me in just a moment is the always intriguing Peter Robbins to discuss trust and ridicule in the field of UFO and alien close encounter research and more. Don't drop out, because we have some very strange, important, and truthfully stinging things to talk about. But before we get to Peter Robbins, please follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/paranormalnowradio, and of course on Instagram @paranormalnow. Please leave your comments and feedback. I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can also go to the website and teleport your thoughts there as well. To speak directly with Peter tonight and ask your questions, call in live using 657-383-0829. Again, the number is 657-383-0829, and that will connect you directly to the studio. Or you can post your questions for Peter on the Paranormal Now live Blog Talk Radio page. So if you go to Blog Talk Radio, Paranormal Now, the live page, there's a comment section there. You can leave your questions, and I'll keep my eye out for that. And in a little bit, I'm going to play some audio for you of the RAF Bentwaters Rendlesham Forest incident. Now, we've spoken with Peter in the past about this, so we don't need to spend a lot of time speaking about it. However, I think that many of you really haven't heard the audio excerpts from this, so I picked out just a few. And what I did was I slowed down a few clips right after the normal speed so that you can better hear, hopefully, what is being said. So this is in England, and this was in 1980 in December. So I'll let Peter Robbins explain that a little bit later, and then we'll play the audio for you. Peter Robbins is an investigative writer specializing in the subject of UFOs. He has more than 35 years' experience as a writer, researcher, investigator, lecturer, and author. A regular fixture on radio shows in the U.S. and in the U.K. He has appeared as a guest on and been consultant to numerous TV programs and documentaries. Robbins has spoken on UFOs, Dr. Wilhelm Reich, and related subjects at local, regional, national, and international conferences, as well as schools, universities, libraries, and organizations. He is co-author, along with Larry Warren, of the British best-selling Left at East Gate, a first-hand account of the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident, its cover-up and investigation. He is the author of Deliberate Deception, a case of disinformation in the UFO research community, and Halton Woolbridge, an Air Force colonel's 30-year fight to silence an authentic UFO whistleblower. Peter was born in New York City, where we are airing live from tonight, and he studied art, design, and theater at the University of Bridgeport in Connecticut. So, Peter, it's great to have you back on again. How are you?
I'm okay. It's good to be back on the show, Alan.
Absolutely. So, obviously, I did some editing with your bio. If there's anything you feel you need to add to that, please feel free to just jump in right now and say it.
Well, there's some things you could have subtracted about that. As some of your listeners know, the best-selling book, which it was in the UK that you mentioned, has now been removed from publication, probably for good and ever, because of numerous untruths, exaggerations, confabulations, overt lies that my co-author included, which also compelled me to remove the two books I wrote after from print availability or downloading. So everything else stands pretty good.
If I may jump in there, Peter, just to put it into context for some people who are not familiar, your co-author, Larry Warren, was a witness at the Rendlesham Forest UFO sighting incident. He was a co-author with you. You helped him to bring out his story. And in the end, what you revealed last year was that his story was, in fact, embellished and falsified to some degree, correct?
Yes, and I simply brought the research and evidence that had so totally taken me aback, which other independent researchers did a very good job on doing, I'm sorry to say. And when I realized the depth to which I had been taken in, which was extraordinary, I had to have a consultation with our publisher, a great little press in Lower Manhattan, and explain to him that I was convinced that, given the nature of the book, which was strictly nonfiction, or so we both thought, that they had to do what I did and conduct their own investigation. And if they came away feeling the way I did, then, frustrating as it was for me in many respects, there's a great deal of well-researched, totally annotated and fact-checked pieces of information in that book that I will always be proud of. But there was no way it really could be allowed to stand the way it was. So early this year, it was removed from press. The other two had already been done so.
Mm-hmm. So do you feel, that you were duped, that that he pulled the wool over your eyes?
Oh, absolutely brilliantly, and for years. And for anybody that's interested in even a beginning account from my point of view, you need only, go to my website, which is Peter Robbins NY, for my home state, peterrobbinsny.com. And there's a long polemic front and center that you can inflict on yourself if you want. In no way, though, should listeners who are familiar with this case or have followed my work regarding it, or anybody seriously interested in the UFO studies, feel that this in any way diminishes or demeans the actual incidents, the corroborable real incidents of December 1980 in the Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England. There are plenty of witnesses whose accounts hold up 100% or near as it can be, and a great deal of evidence of all sorts contributed by quite a wide range of researchers, investigators, experiencers, participants, witnesses, pre-existing authors. It's a very important incident, and again, in no way does this episode diminish the incident itself.
Yeah, that's a good place for us to play this audio. You're familiar with it, recorded by Charles Holt. So can you set the setting for some of the people about this recording? The
events of December 1980 that are generally referred to as the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident occurred over several successive nights in and around this twin base complex. And I think it's on the third night, Charles Holt and a number of men, all identified, all confirmed, all real people, all known, were out in an area of the forest not that far from where some of the other events had occurred. And a thing, call it what you will, came in over them. And Lieutenant Colonel at the time Holt, Deputy Base Commander, had a microcassette recorder with him, which is a good idea if you're out in the field investigating. And so he recorded the reactions of the men and his own as this thing flew over them. And I believe it's a modest segment of a possibly several hours worth of audio tape from that night that only he could confirm.
Okay, so let's play a clip here. And again, this is edited, and there are a couple points where the audio is back-to-back, duplicated, and slowed down a little bit so that you can hear it better.
150 feet or more from the initial, I should say, suspected impact point. Having a lift car that can't get the light all to work. Seems to be some kind of mechanical problem. Let's send back and get another light. Meantime, we're going to take some readings for the Geiger counter, and 150 feet or more from the initial, I should say, suspected impact point. Okay, why don't we do this? Why don't we make a sweep? Here, I've got the blow ourselves on now. Let's take a sweep out around the whole area, about 10 foot out, and make a perimeter run around it. Yes, you're staying steady up around 2 to 3 to 4 units now. Yeah. Each one of these trees that face into the blast, what we assume is a landing site. What we assume is the landing site. What we assume is the landing site. No, and let's identify that as point number 1. That stake there. So you all know where it is. We have to sketch it. You got that, Sir Neville? Yes, sir. Okay. Closest to the Woodbridge base. Meantime, I'm going to look at a couple of these trees over here. We are getting some. You're getting readings on the tree you're taking samples from on the side facing the suspected landing site. 4 clicks max. Up to 4. Interesting. That's right. Where you're taking the sample now. 4. It looked like something twisted as it got, as it sat down on it. Looks like someone took something and sat it down and twisted it from side to side. Very strange.
Okay, so if you can hear as clearly as I can, because I've listened to this, over and over again, so it makes sense to me. Great. Otherwise, some of the things that you would have heard there are landing site, Geiger counter meter measurements that are spiking. There was abrasiveness occurring, abrasive, I guess, action taken against a tree. I'm not sure how to describe that otherwise. But essentially, what they're describing here is a landing site. And so whether you believe Larry Warren or not, this alone corroborates the multitude of other eyewitnesses that were there on site investigating this craft that had landed. Now, Peter, the one thing that I think stands out the most about Larry's story, obviously, is that he makes note that there are aliens in his view at the time. He witnessed some kind of beings, and he's the only one, apparently, that saw that. Is that correct?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
That is what he has maintained. I have no idea what's correct and what's not correct overall at this point. He has told me a series of lies leading up to completely breaking off with him professionally a year and a half ago. I can't say, but I would be suspect of everything that he has put forward based on the track record that he continues to establish with putting things out there that are demonstratively not the truth. He may or may not have been involved, and to what degree, I am not sure. What he says he remembers, he may have remembered. It may have been put in his head. He may have made it up. He may have taken other men's accounts and put them together. I'm not sure. But again, actually, this was not the segment I thought I was going to hear, the one that is most often played for some decades now in radio references to this part of that night. And Larry would not have been with Holt and his men at that time. Also, for anyone who is even remotely harboring a chin-rubbing, eyebrow-raising thought that perhaps what we just heard and the rest of this recording was done in some studio somewhere, or is disinformation or fake news or any other term that might appear to appeal to a skeptic or a debunker, and we should all be skeptics. Yeah, is that this is absolutely real. Again, all of the men are known. The tape has been analyzed and reanalyzed, and this was, as you note, men investigating what seems to be a touchdown, a landing area. But the better-known part of the tape that has had so much airplay is the one where the object in question is actually passing over them, and you can hear the stress in their voices as they speak and try to describe what they're seeing and experiencing.
Right. So, Peter, I have the first caller here on hold. I'm going to see what kind of questions they have for you. So let's transfer now. Caller, are you there?
Hello.
Hey,
Hello,
Carol. Yes.
I'm going to take you off speaker. No idea how that works. Oh,
right.
Mr. Robbins, this is just an enormous honor. First, I want to say how touching I found it just a few seconds ago when you referred to your parting of the ways with Larry Warren as a week ago. That was,
Yeah.
In other words, it's still very vivid, very right there.
In many respects, yeah.
I
But
can only imagine. Well. Yes, and I just want to give you kudos for being such an authentic individual in a world where, and especially in a genre where there are many who are not, whether they're pawns or whether they're outright disinformation folks. Who's to say? Alan, do you want to direct us anywhere?
No. Just go ahead and ask away. Peter, this is Carol from the Inception Radio Network. If you're not familiar.
Carol, it's great to speak with you, and I want to thank you. Your words mean more to me than I can say. That's very important to me.
Oh,
right.
well,
and for the record, Carol is now on KGRA Radio.
Oh, yes.
Right, I do the daily paranormal news update. It's a huge umbrella, lots of NASA. And, yes, so this is an indeed huge, a major treat for me to talk to you. I just also want to say that in the specifics, the nuts and bolts, it seems to me that there wasn't enough focus given either in our particular bailiwick or by mainstream media to the fact that Jim Burroughs won this amazing, grant, the issuance of medical benefits to cover his heart surgeries.
Yes, John Burroughs.
John,
it's
yes.
easy to do that because the other first night witness extremely closely associated with John was Jim Peniston. And I've got a lot of good friends on KGRA. I was a guest on your network just a few short weeks ago on Richard Dolan's show. Right,
excellent. And I have a show in the offing. The working title is Ripped Black with Carol Carl. We'll rip into the redacted, etc. And of course, I'm probably undoubtedly going to approach you for, what a get you would be, as they say.
Have your staff contact my staff.
Yes, I will. my people, and if you're ever in Los Angeles, we must have lunch sometime.
Indeed.
Yes, indeed. Oh my gosh, and then of course, this is not about me, but quickly, my backstory is musical theater from the time I was 15, et cetera, and a little tiny touch of Hollywood, just enough. Thank you very much.
Well, we have another deep connection then. I worked in theatrical management off Broadway for years, and had the pleasure of working with some wonderful actors.
Exactly, and I just, I have a sister who does that, and still to this day, and grandparents, vaudeville, etc. But anyway, seriously, that they're in the tape. Now, I realize that the tape that Alan played, by the way, Alan, nice job. That was really neat.
That is about as clean a recording of that as I've ever heard, and not in any way that, changes things, just makes it nice and audible.
Exactly, and it does this, this emphasis in the slowing down. It's not like it's not like playing X-Files music underneath it, etc. But and so it was very effective. I wonder in that tape, and I realize, Peter, that you may not be familiar with that one segment, and so you might not be able to answer that. There was in the beginning a soldier mentioning that the lighting mechanism was malfunctioning. Can you describe what that lighting thing was? What we're talking about here? Something on a tripod or something on a mounted vehicle, or?
It may have been a variation on what they called a light-all, although those are the larger kind of gas-burning Klieg lights that we associate with sort of the old-fashioned Hollywood opening premieres.
I was just going to say, hey, there we go. But yes, in fact...
The fact is, though, that reports that pepper their way through the Rendlesham Forest incident from a number of sources, as well as other remotely similar incidents, power equipment certainly flashlights and illumination, electrical-driven illumination, can be taken out relatively often, or is troublesome or problematic. It's theoretical whether it's some kind of magnetic field or whatever. It's long associated with the appearance of truly anomalous UFOs.
Well,
right.
Peter, let me ask you, if you're using a Geiger counter to take a measurement, is it possible, like you said, that intense magnetics could actually affect the Geiger?
I don't think so. The
okay.
Geiger counters, as I understand it, only registers, I think, beta and background gamma readings that would only be associated with radioactivity and not electrical activity. But you'd have to confirm that with somebody who actually understands more about science than I do.
Right. It's that nuts and bolts. I have another question. Using your artist's eye, Peter, when you, and I'm just assuming that you probably were among the first to see the renderings of the hieroglyphics, shall we say, on the sides of this, I'm going to call it a craft, this object, and it was Jim Penniston who did the sketches?
Yes, and no, I was one of millions who learned about it pretty much at the same time.
Really?
This happened, of course, in 1980 in December.
Yes.
The case broke nationally in the UK, within the kingdom, the countries of the UK, and then broke internationally, of course, almost immediately in the autumn of 1983. So there's a 3-year lag there. And then Jim did not come forward with that specific information for quite a number of years after that. So, and I think that may have been in the late 70s or early. It might have been as recently as 2010 or so. But that you'd have to check with Jim or with John. But
right.
No, as a nuts and bolts researcher,
yes.
I didn't have privy to early information on that, not at all.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, well, when ultimately, did you want to do something, Alan?
Yeah, I wanted to say thank you so much for calling in, Carol. I love it whenever you join us.
Bless your heart. Are you moving on, or can I ask one more quick question?
Oh, sure, you can squeeze one more in, absolutely.
Oh, okay. So, certainly, it goes like this. Regarding those markings, when you did see them, what was your take? Did Egyptian hieroglyphics come to mind? Was there any overlap, and what did your intuition tell you?
Well, I've been generally studying the subject of what seem to be truly anomalous UFOs, and for about 40 years. And of course, there are many accounts of symbols, signage, a representation of language or numbers that we can take educated guesses at, or send it to the NSA for code cracking.
Right.
It was reminiscent of a number of them, and I have to say, for me, although I'm very pragmatic and have looked into in more cases than I can remember, there's still, a romantic perspective that a lot of people really think, all we do is study the possibilities of, who eats what on what planet or what have you, when
yes.
so much of it is very pedantic. I feel in the presence of a question I can't answer, except to say that it could be exactly what Jim saw and recorded in his notebook the next day, and that might well be a representation, obviously, of letters, numbers, some kind of communication information. But the whole time travel element of Jim's account has always been kind of problematic for me. So my opinion is not that well informed, even after the years of study that I've had, because I know I don't know just what we're talking about here. But yeah, educated guess would be, of course, there's a commonality the same way that Sumerian, is the root language of the languages that all look different and that sound different that we speak and write on Earth today.
Yeah. Well, actually, I was going to say, Peter, do you mind if I send Carol your contact information so you guys can get together
not
for
at all.
PGRA? Okay, great.
And Carol, I
fantastic.
actually may be in Los Angeles next week. So
well, I'll be darned. Then listen. Oh, that would be that would be kind of fantastic and amazing. Oh, listen. Thank you so much, and Alan, thank you for your generosity.
Oh yeah, thanks for coming out, Carol.
Yeah. All right.
Take care. We'll be in touch soon.
Yes, indeed.
And
all right.
Good speaking with you, Carol.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Peter, and we'll be in touch.
You bet.
Good night.
All right, be well, Carol.
Night.
Good night.
So actually, Peter, I have a question here, question/statement from YouTube. Jay, he said, there was more corroborating evidence coming out on Bentwaters from airmen that were never interviewed until more recently. So he feels that there is more true and solid evidence to support this incident now more than ever. Do you fall in line with that same sentiment, or?
Oh, I definitely agree, Alan. What we continue to see, and I think one of the watermarks, as Carol duly noted, in this case, to give everybody a giant tap on the shoulder and remind them that this is historic, it's real, and work continues to progress, is that first night witness, John Burroughs, who suffered some very deleterious health effects that seem directly connected, most heart-related. I'm not familiar with the intimate details, but I know and respect and like John and wish him the absolute best, that he received an acknowledgement in terms of a financial settlement for the health effects that he suffered. Draw the logical extended line from exposure to a machine of undetermined origin from parts unknown, that the Veterans Administration and by extension the military are saying in so many words, we're acknowledging this with payment for care, but we're not going to discuss how it might have happened or what it was related to or the implications of that.
And what about any sort of additional physical evidence? Do you feel like there's anything yet to be discovered?
An awful lot. And this is not the place to really catalog it. But yeah, I think Rendlesham is one of a handful of cases, to refer to it dispassionately, that the real information that has been confirmed, and what has been confirmed is not, yes, this was a machine of undetermined origin and advanced intelligences from Alpha Centauri in this model spaceship. We don't even know if it was extraterrestrial. But the evidence that has accumulated within the responsible research community around this case would be enough to, I think, convict somebody of a felony in a court of law if such matters were adjudicated. You have all the kinds of evidence that you would see presented in a major criminal or civil investigation. But, of course, it's an outsider subject, so, it has that kibosh on it.
So this past year, I guess, it's been a little more than a year, that you've been quite open about, this, scathing incident, ongoing incident for years. I mean, how... Oh. Peter, are you getting a feedback at all?
No, I'm listening to what you're saying.
Okay, I'm sorry. I just got the odd audio effect there. Okay. So do you feel like... Peter, hold on 1 second. I'm having some audio trouble here. Okay. Yeah. So anyway, the question is,
yeah.
You know, how have you dealt with this basically since you've come out?
Well, it all for me began to come together about 2 years ago, and I made a number of basic statements about a year and a half ago with a long, definitive, fairly much so, analysis and account and narrative to lay out the basics for anybody that either had read and liked and respected the book that Larry and I wrote together, or either of the follow-up books that I have written, or any of the many, many talks I've given on it, or laudatory toward my former co-author radio shows, and made it a point to read absolutely every independent claim that either I had not looked deep enough when I started this research with him over 30 years ago, or had been unaware of something that could be proven that established an untruth, another untruth in the book. I was depressed, angry, disappointed, and actually shocked, not to mention embarrassed. For several months, I did my best to maintain, I was living in kind of a deer in the headlights reality of, good Lord, I have to clean this up. I have to make good to the people that, I've met through this, and who, in part, their picture of me was based on what they felt was the completely honest information in this book that I was associated with. And contacted people one at a time, did what I'm doing now, and talked about it. And
what about on social media? And people can be really vicious. Did you feel like there was a backlash?
Well, in that period of 2 or 3 months where I was still taking in and reading new accounts of how wrong I had gotten something, or how I had misread my former co-author, or not believed something somebody had told me that I probably should have, I finally realized that, again, the only thing that I could do was be hyper-specific in the way that I addressed it. And that began with taking responsibility. This was nobody's fault but mine. I believed the guy. And after X amount of time together, I believed him basically absolutely. And therein was the biggest problem. I'm very good at true, and will defend a friend if I feel they're unfairly being attacked, and certainly the same with a professional colleague. And once it started to unwind, again, the only thing to do was to be as forthcoming as I possibly could, and realize, worse things happen to people. Some folks, a very small handful of people, felt I had looked the other way, that
purposely
I
looked
was
the other way,
in on a hoax, things that hurt and were certainly not true. But overwhelmingly, it's been really quite a moving year plus, with so many people, some who I know and are colleagues or friends, but so many more that I've never met, who have some sense of who I am, who have been nothing but kind and supportive, and just filled with goodwill. So, therein, I guess, is the silver lining to a very rough professional episode.
How would you advise further future researchers and ufologists What advice would you give them then to avoid this sort of situation? Because it is slippery. I mean, so much of what you and other ufologists, if I may use that term for you, are doing. They're listening to people's eyewitness account, and oftentimes you're just relying on the hoped for or assumed credibility of that individual, and it's slippery.
Well, that's a great question, Alan. Number one, you begin the way I do work and thought I was working on this, but did not drill down deep enough in a number of areas. Basically, you fact check. It's boring. It's not very sexy. It can be tedious, but you fact check anything that you're contemplating putting on the public record. My biggest problem was being a basically nice person and fairly trusting. Certainly can be critical, and people who have crossed me literally have sometimes regretted it. But I had never imagined...
You're a New Yorker.
Yeah, right. Forget about it. I had never imagined, quite honestly, that anybody who might someday approach me to co-author a book had already committed themselves to certain deceptions in the book and with the person that they ended up being co-author with. And in retrospect, that really shocked me. The intent to deceive from the start. Not on everything, but it doesn't matter. It can just be one thing.
Are there social cues that you're more aware of now? Behavioral cues.
I started working with them over 30 years ago, so a lot of water under the bridge. But you can. How can I say? I wouldn't want to trade in being a basically trusting person of goodwill and be wrong every once in a while, but this was so far over the top and, again, so completely out of left field for me.
Has anyone else approached you since then and said, hey, write a book about me?
Essentially, his part in the event. I would do, and I write about it. He writes about it in Left at Eastgate. Essentially, that if he had a chance to tell his own story on his own terms, then I was free to back it up or to disprove it. Add mass to the book, other things besides his account of his involvement. And so it grew out of that understanding. I think also good counsel among friends and asking people's opinion of, opinions that you have grown to trust for good reasons. We should all have our own little councils of advisors informally, within our circles of friends. But follow your intuition, too. If something says to you, there's something off about this, there are a number of places where I actually write about having certain feelings, developing the material over the years, but not feeling quite 100% right. And I should have listened to most of those intuitive moments, but just continued to charge forward. His bad behavior I could always chalk off to being worked on by military intelligence, to standing alone so courageously for such a long time, post-traumatic stress, which I have no idea whether he had or not. Again, common sense, critical thinking, certainly goodwill, but there aren't a lot of people out there that I've met in my life. And again, it's like joking and saying if I have another repressed memory in my life, I don't remember it. If I've ever met somebody who was so convincing at not being truthful, I'm not aware of it.
Right, but if someone else came up to you now and said, "Hey, I have this story," would you take on another story at this point?
It would have to be a hell of a story, and I'm working on a number of projects and another book right now, and I'm just fine without co-authoring a book with anybody right now. Thank you.
Well, I mean, you say it would have to be quite a story, but I mean, the Rendlesham Forest incident is quite a story. I mean, that is one of the top. I would put it in the top 5 all-time most significant close encounter events that have been documented.
It is, and I feel
with Roswell. Yeah.
Yep.
It's there with Roswell, Stephenville UFO incident, and so many more.
Yeah, and I feel privileged to have had the opportunity to work diligently to try to add information to the collective pool, which I did to some degree, but probably not to the degree that I inadvertently added confusion as well without intending to. But no question about it, this is not a case that I feel compelled to continue working in or on. I was left fairly burnt out regarding this particular series of incidents by the intervening 2 years, but that doesn't mean that I take the case less seriously or only wish the best as the active researchers in the field, most of whom are in the UK, but certainly not all of them, continue to delve into it. I think, like the other great cases, there will be things that continue to emerge, and not just witnesses, but certainly other witnesses too, who, for I think all the right reasons, have preferred to just live their lives without notoriety, especially observing how society, the news media, the world, our culture, sometimes treats people who allege to have had such incidents happen in their lives.
Yeah, and you've had a close encounter incident yourself long before any of this occurred.
Well, I had an absolute life-changing sighting when I was 14 years old, growing up on Long Island in the 1960s with one of my sisters, and one that was so troubling, overwhelming, problematic for me as an adolescent that I did put it out of my mind for more than 14 years. And when that memory came roaring back, and I was able to confirm it with my sister, without telling her anything, by the way, about the memory, but describing the afternoon, the day, the weather, time, that kind of thing, that sent my life and career off in a very different direction than where I had intended it to go.
Clearly, I mean, earlier we were talking about musical theater and the theater.
No, actually, I was a painter in New York City, and that was the first world that I was hoping to break into. It wasn't until some years later that I got this wonderful opportunity to work in not musical theater, but restaging of classic plays with a wonderful repertory company. And for anybody that's ever worked in live theater, especially in a place like New York City with known actors and been right there in the middle of it, it's very heady stuff and a lot more fun overall than this work.
Are you into musical theater at all?
Not much. I was lucky enough to be taken to some of the great musicals by my grandmother and my great aunt as I was a kid growing up just outside of Manhattan. So it was part of the golden age of great musicals, and I certainly enjoy them. But if I'm in the city or anywhere and I have a chance to see a musical or a play, I usually opt for the play, but hey, it depends on the play and it depends on the musical.
Well, normally when you talk about musical theater, you get the question of who do you prefer, Sondheim or Andrew Lloyd Webber?
Neither. I'm most certainly Rodgers and Hammerstein.
Rodgers and
Hart.
Yeah.
Back before them as well. I'm a real snob.
Yeah. But that's all right. They're classics, so you can hang your hook on that. Right. Anyway, so back to the story here. So you had your own personal experience here. Your sister, she was her memory recall is that she was abducted. Is that correct?
Yes, and I like.
And you weren't though, right?
Yeah, that seems to be 100% after a series of hypnotic regressions with a series of practitioners, including Bud Hopkins and another one of my mentors, a tough, no-nonsense New York City police detective who had been trained years ago to use hypnotic regression for criminal investigation. One of the patterns observed in abduction research as it continued to emerge, in great part under my dear old friend Bud Hopkins, was a series of patterns, one of which is they, for lack of a more descriptive term, seem interested in certain individuals and not others. It could be one sibling rather than the other, one spouse rather than the other, two friends together. One basically goes unconscious or is knocked out or put to sleep or what have you, and the other one is taken and returned. And my sister's memory of her event, we first discussed it 40 years ago, but it went back to the 60s when she was about 12 years old. And when she described the memory, parts of the memory, to me for the first time on that initial phone call, you could have knocked me down with a feather. I had never, that I recalled, heard anything like this in my life, although I believe it probably would have been impossible in the culture of the mid-60s to not have heard about Betty and Barney Hill. That case happened in 61, but the story broke in the news media about 65. So if I had heard anything about UFO abduction, that would have been the passing reference, and I don't have any sense of having paid attention to it. It just wasn't a subject that interested me. At the same time, the description of the memories, which, by the way, my sister never forgot. They were not, as they sometimes are, recovered via hypnotic regression. These were things she never forgot. And even though they were unlike anything I ever heard when she told me in 1975, looking back now, honest to God, I'm sure I've heard similar accounts, some of them almost word for word, in a dozen different countries over the past 40 years, and in some cases even using the same terminology of what individuals remember these other intelligences saying to them in their heads or telepathically, as always seems to be the case. But at the time, again, it was, to use a slightly overworked phrase, paradigm shifting for me. I was following my dream of wanting to be a New York City-based painter, and a good one. And all of a sudden, something came crashing into my life that wasn't more interesting per se, but was more important and obsessed me. And I resented it because I had something I was intent on doing. I continued to paint and draw and teach painting and show my work for a number of years beyond that, but a certain amount of the heart had gone out of it. I was faking it in some respects in my experience, and that was very frustrating.
Well,
it still is to a degree.
Do you share your art now publicly? I don't see anything on your website.
No. I have made some explorations into restarting over the past few years, but there's always seems to be something coming up that needs to or should be dealt with first. Thankfully, I've rarely put down my camera in the intervening years. I'm a passionate photographer.
Okay.
And at the same time,
it's good to,
yeah. And as a creative outlet, yes. One of the things I admired so much about Bud Hopkins, and for anyone in your audience, I've used that name several times. Bud is also a painter who passed in the summer of 2011 at the age of 80 from cancer, but he wrote several of the most important UFO abduction-related books, and really could properly be called kind of the father of scientific abduction studies. And those books are Missing Time, Intruders, and Witness, the True Story of the Brooklyn Bridge UFO event. And a couple of other very good books that I think will always be worth reading for people in the work. But Bud and my sister worked together for a considerable amount of time, and I think without her, we wouldn't be talking today, certainly.
Well, and what I was going to say, too, is that, even if you're, caught up in ufology, I'm glad that you do have an outlet, because as is evident by my recent Instagram post of a drawing that I did, the love of my life encourages me to draw. She's a fantastic artist herself. You can actually on Instagram, it's armara.noir.
Great.
And anyway, so she's encouraging me, and it is therapeutic. It feels good.
Yes,
even though I'm not good, it feels good. And I play with the ukulele on my spare time. I don't share that with anyone else publicly.
Too late
but
now.
But I won't play publicly. Give me another 10 years. But it's good for me. It's good for the soul. And this is a world of imagination.
Yes, and we need to balance out and lighten up very often, especially in these kinds of studies. The thing about Bud, again, was that he never stopped painting. And I know he loved it. It helped keep him sane. He was a brilliant painter and a great draftsman, and always remained in the New York art community, as well as in the international heights of respected UFO research.
You've covered so many gamuts of UFO research. I mean, not just the Rendlesham Forest UFO incident. Of the many other topics, do you think that Travis Walton is truly a credible experience? I know you spent some time working on a documentary involved in that.
I think you could not have picked a better example of somebody who, among countless witnesses, is as good as they get. It's fortunate that this documentary that you referred to, which is called Travis, the True Story of Travis Walton, was made and well made by the Philadelphia-based documentary filmmaker Jennifer Stein and her production company On Wings, and that's WINGES, On Wings. It's as good a UFO documentary as I've ever seen, and I say that knowing that I might not be seen as an objective voice, because I was an associate producer on the film, which took, I guess, about 5 years to complete. It really gives the hardest look it can at the allegations, at all the individuals involved, from scientific point of view, psychological point of view, law enforcement has a large voice in reviewing the material, scientific analysis, character, physical evidence. There are other cases, and as a writer who loves words, the word case and cases sometimes sticks a little for me when we remember that we're talking about life events that can be absolutely traumatic to the individuals involved, detrimental to their standing in the community, blow back at them in terms of ridicule and be hurtful to them and their family. Honestly, though, Alan, I think you've hit on one of the great cases that is out there, and one that I have found absolutely fascinating. I have visited the exact area where it happened with Travis and others. I've studied it 6 Ways from Sunday, and he also happens to be a rather remarkably decent and down-to-earth human being who I'm proud to have as a friend.
Well, I mean, I think that there is probably not many or no one better than you at this point. I'm not saying this just to throw out compliments, to cover and go back and look at some of these other stories because you've been burnt. And so when you've gone through the fire of deception yourself, you probably have a keener eye, at least in some respects, than other people who haven't had to deal and carry that burden.
Maybe. I guess at about the age of 12, I was introduced to a wonderful literary character, Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes. I came upon Holmes' acquaintance through the wonderful old late 1930s, early to mid 40s British films about Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, starring the great Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce. And one of the things that appealed to me as a kid and as an adult about Holmes is this idea of deductive reasoning. When presented with new information, even if it's on a subject like UFOs and another incident or witness-driven account that sounds good, I try to approach it as a brand new reality and not simply assume that it is what it purports to be just because other ones have done just that and proved to be truly anomalous. Deductive reasoning requires that you begin by investigating the most mundane, everyday, logical, boring explanation for the mystery that you confront. And if that does not work out, take one small step up the ladder to the second most boring, mundane explanation, and keep going. If by the time you've exhausted all of the conventional, even exotic conventional possibilities, that's when things become really interesting. Again, it's tedious. It's often just boring as hell. Again, not sexy, like just saying, "Oh my God, this is the base on the moon that the Alpha Centaurians fought our moon mission men in 1962, and there was a treaty, and blah, blah, blah," and all the other stuff that is part of the lore, legend, myth, and nonsense to a degree of UFO studies that nobody can refute because you can't disprove it any more than you can empirically and absolutely prove it.
True, but when you do the dry work, the result can be quite thrilling.
Yeah, one of the main lessons I learned from Pete Mazzola, my New York City detective friend, was triangulate. When law enforcement or attorney team are building a case, you're looking for different types of evidence that will substantiate each other. Photographic evidence in an area that has a history of involvement in the situation at hand. Documentation and letters that support the eyewitness testimony, different eyewitness testimonies that support each other, physiological changes to organic material where they have seemingly come in contact with the phenomena in question, and build a truly three-dimensional case based on the types and kinds of evidence that one could bring into a courtroom situation. Again, that's an ideal. And now, in this modern age with the Internet, it's such a double-edged sword. There's so much out there that may or may not be of value, and there's so much unadulterated crap, and fewer people willing or interested to take the time to actually check out the wonderful photo that may be photoshopped and has no real provenance, but it sure looks cool, and it supports, something that you have a theory about or believe is part of a conspiracy or.
And the Travis Waltman case of an actual, he was physically abducted. This case is not about faking some video or imagery, and this took place well before any of that came to be popular.
Yes.
So
November 1975.
What do you have to work with in retrospect now?
Well, that's true, and the abduction aspect is one of the most rock solid parts of the entire account. Had Walton, who was missing for 5 days, stayed in the woods with what he was wearing at those times, he probably would have frozen to death. It was the late arch debunker Phil Klass who tried to discredit the case, who said, well, there was probably a cabin, somewhere nearby where he was hiding out while he was getting famous, having snacks in the woods. Well, I've been to the Sitgraves National Forest, and again, to that exact location where it happened. It spans parts of 3 states. It's millions of square acres. It's as deep in the wilderness as most people will ever get. And he was gone for 5 days. They had military, law enforcement, Native American trackers, dogs. He was gone. And law enforcement, understandably, thought there was a possibility that maybe he wasn't abducted by a UFO, and that, these rough and tumble guys who were doing the logging with him, all old friends from childhood, pretty much, somebody got in somebody's face, things escalated, and a tragedy happened, and there was a body buried in the woods, and they were intent on finding it if it was there. So the whole thing exploded in such a sensationalistic way, and I'm not going to try to trivialize the specifics by, jamming in a couple in a minute or two, but if you, for any of your listeners, actually, good idea, if you visit the website of the production company, one word, On Wings, ONWINGES.com, they have a running schedule of where and when the documentary is being screened next. It's also available as a DVD, but I know there will be a screening the end of next month in I'll think of it, in New Jersey as part of the International MUFON Symposium.
That'd be great for people to tune in and catch up with the story. Just as a brief overview, I mean, he went out with younger loggers, right? I think they're all pretty much in their early 20s.
I think it's 17 to about 24. And
right.
The next screening will be in Cherry Hill, New Jersey at the end of July.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sure.
these were professional loggers who had finished a day's work, and as it was getting dark, observed a glow coming through the forest. People might appreciate that in different ways. For them as outdoors guys, since they were kids, they thought there might be a possibility of a fire beginning and headed for that area. And there is where they encountered a fully articulated disc-shaped object hovering 25 or 30 feet above a clearing where they had done some work. And Travis is the first to say it. He impulsively jumped out of the cab of that truck and ran out under it in a blaze of macho glory. Then very quickly realized perhaps he had not made a very good decision, with his friends and coworkers screaming at him to get back into the cab. He ducked behind some logs. At what he felt was an opportune moment, moved to clear the area and return to the vehicle. And as he did, he was hit full on in the chest by a bolt of blue light observed by the other men, thrown between 10 and 12 feet. When he came down, he was not moving. There was steam coming off his body. His best friend and the crew chief, Mike Rogers, at the wheel, gunned it and stopped further down the road as they all decided they needed to go back. And by the time they did, it was gone and Travis with it.
All right. And we have a caller here. Caller, you're on the line with Peter Robbins.
Hi, Alan. My name is Dan. I'm from Southern California. Mr.
Hey, Dan,
Robbins.
how are you?
I'm really good, Mr. Robbins. Even with the problems with the Rendlesham book, the incident itself screams reality, because all of these true incidents have this same feature of time warping, and I was wondering if you've thought about how these craft and vehicles are actually propelling themselves through the universe, because it seems to me that to generate something that warps time has to be immense gravity, like a black hole. And I've done some of my own research. I live in an area that happens to have a lot of anomalous incidents in the sky that I've been filming for a while. And when I zoom up on some of these, especially like a cigar one that I caught, was very, very, it showed this travel where it would seemingly disappear and extend itself forward. And I just, getting my head around the time warping and this kind of quantum jumping, I don't know. I have to ask you what your thoughts are.
My thoughts are just that. My training is almost all in the arts, and I'm self-educated in all of the specific areas of science that I felt compelled to learn more about to better understand the bigger picture here. As far as I'm concerned, Dan, almost anything goes in the way of theoretics. I have been a devoted student of the work of Dr. Wilhelm Reich since I was a teenager, and his science of how energy functions in the living and non-living realm. Perhaps some of these technologies are based in having found a way to harness the great sea of energy that animates all the space between us and, every cell in our body. Perhaps there are other engine or motor forces that we are fairly close to ourselves, at least in a classified way. But when all is said and done, I don't know. I am really clear that I don't know, and certainly have colleagues who this is a huge part of their focus in their investigations and research, and many of them, of course, are equipped with appropriate technical and scientific backgrounds. I even find it hard to hold an opinion because it's not a fully informed opinion, if you know what I mean. I'm open to any and all possibilities. I've had 2 memorable sightings in my life, and I'm damned if I know how they're powered.
I thank you for your honesty, Mr. Robbins, and thank you for letting me on, Alan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. Sure. And I think that Dan, brings up a good point, because it sort of begs the question. It's like you get into the field of. Thanks, Dan, for coming on. Get into the field of ufology, and it's like studying a shark without understanding water. It has to feel like that sometimes.
Yeah. Bud used to joke sometimes about debunkers, and again, I want to differentiate them from skeptics. You and I, Alan, need to be skeptics every day of our life. You're a host who has ever so many guests with paranormal attached subjects. For myself, I have to be as careful as I can in evaluating material, the obvious aside. But debunkers, as Bud used to point out, they're special. They know the unknowable. They're amazing, in fact. They know that truly anomalous UFOs coming and going from parts unknown, unimpeded by human beings, and possessing technology we can hardly even dream of, that it's all fairy dust and unicorns and nonsense. How do they know this? Well, that's part of the magic of being a skeptic. The mantra, though, is it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else. And my job as a professional skeptic or somebody who is very anxious about things that I'm uncomfortable with is to explain it away to you in every possible conventional or pseudoscientific term, because it can't be. Even though I can't empirically prove that, I know it's true because, well, if it was, somebody as important as me would have figured it out by now, or thoughts to that effect.
You had mentioned Dr. Willem Reich earlier. Could you expound on his influence on you and what his theories mean to you?
Sure, a little. Dr. Reich is responsible for science that he named orgonomy, which, simply defined, is the science of how energy functions in the living and non-living realms, meaning that it cuts across literally every type of scientific discipline and extends well into the world of political and social thinking. In his life, and he was born in 1897 and died in 1957, he explored so many areas of natural inquiry that to an uninformed, quick-passing viewer, it would seem like he was all over the place. But for anyone who takes the time to study his work and the progression of it will see that he went from working directly under the legendary Dr. Freud as a first assistant of his at a time when psychoanalysis was forming itself in Europe in the 1920s, to applying how energy functions in people relative to social and political movements, to cancer research and study, to human sexuality, to raising healthy children, to how storms and weather fronts come together and happen, to everything from how a single-celled creature splits and becomes two, to the formation and destruction of star systems. And as somebody who observed UFOs on a number of occasions, fully witnessed by other people, other credible people, often scientists and doctors like himself, his observations and conclusions regarding the UFO phenomena are extraordinary in themselves, and given that he had the courage to publish around them, and weather modification work that he was successfully undertaking, once again, the outside uninformed world found it fairly easy to dismiss him, because why even bother to replicate or read about his scientific work when we all knew it was nonsense? I think he was one of the greatest geniuses of the past number of thousands of years, and if we don't blow ourselves to hell, the science of how energy functions may well help guide us into whatever adventures lay beyond current reality and history.
If I might say, Peter, this sounds a lot like, and this is the Star Wars fan in me, the Force.
It's interesting that you say that.
Yeah.
That's not a bad description. The Hindus would have called it the prana. The Victorians would have called it the ether. It is the sea of energy, and we seem to keep losing it and focusing on mechanical means of energy production and movement, more so now than ever, everything from coal to nuclear to gasoline, rather than more passive renewable types of energies. But I'm only even just scratching the surface here. The Dr. Reich and his life and studies is a subject well worth pursuing and continues to fascinate me.
Yeah, I wonder how that translates to ufology, or rather your understanding of how the craft might work. Is there any correlation there?
Again, good question. It translates to ufology per se hardly at all. Myself and a very small number of colleagues that I'm even aware of have more than a passing interest in Reich's observations and conclusions and writings concerning the UFO phenomena, and that's kind of a shame. But another reason that I understand why even knowledgeable folks with an interest in his work in the field may have tended to shy away or keep from associating themselves with his work is because the level and the amount and the kinds of ridicule leveled on ufology and people who spend their lives involved in it is and remains to a degree functionally identical with the kind of ridicule that uninformed, arrogant, completely unexperienced in terms of replicating experiments or reading any of his work. Every critic I've ever spoken to of Reich's work bases their criticisms on what they have read or understood about him and his work, and never bothered to even read a part of one of the books, of the many books or many published papers and articles that he wrote over the decades he was a practicing scientist. And that kind of intellectual arrogance is part of what keeps the subject of UFOs, truly anomalous UFOs and their implications, completely dumbed down, and even after more than 70 years in the modern realm, a outsider subject in a world that believes it's open to so many possibilities.
Is the path of the ufologist a spiritual path?
It depends. For me, I approach it, the work in general, very pragmatically, and I'm not a religious person, but I certainly have a strong spiritual aspect. And this work and the people I've met and things that I have learned or situations that it has put me in over the decades, some of them have been incredibly memorable and incredibly moving. By some definitions, aspects could be described as somewhat spiritual, but mostly for me, it's investigation, research, digging, the simple act of reading, and all the protocols that go into ideally being a good investigative writer.
For everything that you've experienced so far, do you really believe that these are physical beings and not spiritual entities of some sort, or perhaps, ultra-dimensional?
Well, the more I've read and studied, quite honestly, the more I realize that I am sure, I am sure how little I actually know for certain. What I mean by that, and I don't mean to play with words, is there's a definition of a Zen beginner called, which basically is knowing that you know nothing and having it be okay. I know considerably more than nothing about the UFO phenomena, but no matter how much I know that I could take to court or prove to you with evidences and exhibits and witnesses and documentation, all the like, it's the tip of an iceberg. It's a Pandora's box that when you lift the lid, there's another 100 lids of another 100 little Pandora's boxes to lift. We are delving deeper into the unknown, and there is a thread of deception that seems to run through it from the get-go. 40 years ago, if you would have asked me, I was just a beginning kind of hothead, power to the people. We can take it. Let us know what's going on. You have no right to repress these facts from us. We have our freedom of, we didn't quite have the Freedom of Information Act quite yet, but that we can all take it, and obviously they're, intelligent beings from outer space, and what else is new? But as I've continued to educate myself and hear other views and learn from colleagues and folks who have had experiences or been taken, I am convinced that one aspect, at least, of what explains the unidentified flying object phenomena is, in fact, highly advanced technology from parts unknown that, for lack of a better term, is extraterrestrial. At the same time, who's to say that, this wonderful speck of dust we're moving through space on at tens of thousands of miles an hour and yet managing to hold on as we speak to each other, that there's not another presence here with us all along, or that joined us somewhere along the way, or that we joined. Perhaps they pre-exist us here on Earth, and perhaps there are different dimensional types of intelligences layered into our reality. There may be some sitting in your studio and in my office right now enjoying our conversation vicariously. The great... They may, yep. Yeah, right.
I mean, you don't know, right.
Another pioneering and brilliant UFO researcher, and writers like the great John Keel have written for, or had written for decades in Keel's case, about other explanations for UFO phenomena. And then, of course, increasingly, in what we'll laughingly call modern times, we have, or increasingly modern times, black-budgeted what's-is up there that probably do come very close to or already mimic so much of what their technology can do. I am convinced that overwhelmingly many, if not the great majority, of so-called UFO reports, sighting reports, are very likely explainable in conventional terms, even if conventional is exotic so to say, conventional. But we're left in a world where there are always going to be people that will tell you the exactitudes of everything. There are 58 different races visiting the planet. All aliens are good. The bad ones are never involved in abduction. That's all military to make you think you're being abducted, to give them a bad rap. The good ones are like E.T., the bad ones are like Mars Attacks. You know, I'm damned if I know. But I'll tell you what I...
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. What I think is most important in a human sense, in a way that could matter, is that imagine if something broke this story open. And if you're waiting for the United States government to do it, don't hold your breath. I think they will be last to even consider it, and not unless their back is to the wall. Who knows? Maybe in the next few years the story will be broken by the Chinese or the Russians looking to show us up and take leadership in terms of what happens. Maybe it'll come in the form of some kind of undeniable WikiLeaks type phenomena, or truly authentic, confirmed photos from NASA's archives and other space programs showing clear photographs of ancient and not so ancient constructions, objects, areas of development on the moon, Mars, wherever will break through. I guess what I'm saying here is that the powers that be, the ones that increasingly are making this world, and unfortunately this country we live in, more and more tribal in the way that we are dealing with each other.
So true, yeah.
Nationalism is part of the glue that holds that together. Rah, rah, my country, and your country is different than ours, and you might hurt us, so we should kill you. We have been clubbing each other. And it breaks down into
subcategories from there, too.
Yeah. Human activity, even at this late date in our development, is still overwhelmingly, and when I say human, I mean man's activity, because the dominance of men as opposed to women in these areas is absolutely agreed upon, that our main activity in this world is still dancing around the reality of, here's the line in the dirt. You on this side, me on that side, unless maybe I want more of your side, or if you come on this side, and then I kill you and everybody you know, because that's what real men do. And I love my little splotch here, and you can stay on yours. It's not as good as mine. Bottom line,
well, speaking of splotches, Peter, I'm sorry I have to cut you off there. We're at the end here.
Oh, a good point to hold the audience in fascination.
Yeah. Can you say it real fast?
Yes. If we all realize that we are human beings first, and that we are faced with genuine other intelligences from out there, perhaps we'd all have a better chance of dealing with each other in a healthier manner.
All right, that's a beautiful way to end the show. Thank you so much, Peter Robbins, for coming on. If you want to find out more about Peter, go to peterrobbinsny.com. And Peter, are you speaking anywhere nearby, upcoming soon?
I will probably be in Los Angeles next weekend, taping an episode of a very well-known show. I will not say the name of the show, but we'll let everybody know in various posts and Facebook when it will be broadcast. And hope I will be seeing the rest of you on the circuit around the country.
All right. Take care, Peter. Thanks so much. This is Alan B. Smith for Paranormal Now. We'll see you next week at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, live once again. Live in the mystery. Be well, everyone.